Public Q&A presents AskReddit question. Professors of Reddit, have you ever looked yourself up on RateMyProfessor? What did you find? I was rated as a top professor, featured when you open my school's RMP page. Very flattering. But did you have the chili pepper? I think they got rid of that. They did. Then what's even the point anymore? At my school, the hottest prof was an elderly physics professor for the longest time. He's a great teacher and researcher, but I could never understand the chili pepper ranking, even as irony. Hell yeah, good work. While I was in college, my father taught a class at it too, although in a different field than mine. One day I decided to check, and much to my surprise I discovered that he had been rated. It was a fairly good rating, but what stuck with me was the comment, "He's a good professor, but if you take his class be prepared to learn all about his family. He loves to use them in his examples." I was a little embarrassed, but at the same time it made me feel good. I didn't tell him until years later. Oh, I have a friend who did this. Even shared that his adult son needed to be circumcised for a health reason. My dad is a professor, so I searched him up, and no one bothered rating him. Sit in on a lecture and give him his first review. Never showed up to any of my junior league baseball games. Worst dad, professor ever. He went out for smokes years ago, and still hasn't come back. If he doesn't return within 15 minutes, you are legally allowed to move out. I am not sure it applicable in this case. Mom died by choking on his own lung fluid before it was cool. My dad was a prof, and I looked him up, and most of the students hated him. Had like a 2.5 and lots of complaints. Did you expect a bad rating going in? Oddly, no. My dad is a narcissist and always thought he was the best instructor in the department. I believed him. Seeing the reality was actually one of the many things that year that finally helped me start seeing through his BS. My father once applied to a teacher position, and I prayed with my whole heart that he would not get the job. I felt such dread at the idea of other students being subjected to his megalomania. So yeah, I get it. Virtual hug. I wish I could have wished for my dad not to be a teacher. Now I have to hear him scream at the poor students that don't understand the material because lockdown, just like he did to me, I am so glad this information is helping you out. I have had a great deal of personal and professional pain because of narcissists. My experience as a child led me to learn a lot about narcissism, and to understand to some extent the signs, and how it affects their behavior. Honestly, it drives me nuts at work how others do not see it, and time after time they seem surprised when certain people act in their very predictable selfish narcissistic ways, and it has a bad outcome on all of us. And it could have been prevented. Just remember, it is very difficult for us to truly evaluate other people's behavior when we are involved in the transaction. To best evaluate others, watch their behavior with other people, in situations you are not involved in. Also consider short and long-term behavior, how they act over short relationships, like interaction in a restaurant with a waiter or waitress, and long-term relationships, family, friends. This gives you some objectivity. People are very consistent with their behavior. If they are assholes to most people who are not in the room at the time, they are going to be assholes about you when you are not there, or when you are not serving their needs or purposes. I did the same with my mom, and her students were fucking roasting her. At least he's not narcissistic enough to write fake good reviews for himself. I've had some professors that gave me a sneaking suspicion that they boosted their own rating. You inspired me to look up my dad, and he has a 4.5. A friend's dad only has a 4. Now I have numerical evidence proving my dad is superior. Now you just have to get them to fight in the Denny's parking lot. So feed them liquor that comes in a plastic bottle. In my experience, that usually means he's teaching higher level classes where people don't bother rating, or smaller classes. By the time I got to my senior year in my small neuroscience program, very few of my professors had any reviews. Yeah, I'm not sure what exactly he teaches, but I know he teaches a graduate class. That's probably why. It's generally only undergrads that use the site. Considering that people are more likely to post a negative review than a positive one, I'd say this may actually reflect positively on him. Not me, but my husband. One of his students said, "I wish he were my grandpa." That's adorable. For 20 years Miso has been highly rated, 4.8, with a chili pepper. He's now starting his 25th year, and is grandpa age. I would love to see this review. And yes, we check the ratings once in a while to have a good laugh. I think our recent favorite was he's vegan but not easily offended. OMG, we laughed forever about that. Especially since he's not vegan. Your husband sounds like an amazing person. Thank you. He's a very kind man. The comment made both of us laugh. I looked up my sister, she wears a lot of black. One of the ratings said I love Professor's sister. She stalks around campus like Professor Snape and looks like a total badass. Please tell me you and everyone not related but familiar with you both publicly call her Professor Sister. This is possibly my favorite. I would consider that high praise. That would make my life. As a pudgy middle-aged balding man I was quite pleasantly surprised with chilies. You must be, as one reviewer for a lit professor, I once had put it, an intellectual daddy. You don't need to pretend, we know you came up with this term. Professor Zaddy, in the teacher's lounge, with a dildo. Both meanings of lit work here. It's bigger when it's balder. Excuse me, what? Look, either drop the nudes or don't tease us, pick one. Chilies? Students think he's hot. You can use chili emojis to mark that a professor is attractive. Edit, it sounds like this isn't a thing anymore. Well, I had a 4.0 until the student that I caught plagiarizing left a 1-star review calling me the most arrogant professor she ever had. Girl, maybe don't copy whole paragraphs that are written in British Standard English and try to turn them in as your own work when you're going to an American community college. Not my fault you cheated. At my uni, we had a guy that copied an entire Italian PhD and translated it all to English and then submitted it as his own. That's dedication. Or 3 clicks with Google Translate. In my experience that would lead to a very broken translation, LOL. I got the impression that it was a broken translation and got it caught. He might even have hired someone to do that for him. Be honest, that sounds like more work than actually writing the paper yourself. You'd not only have to translate it, but you'd need to reword the entire paper so that it fits with proper English strands flow and standard writing conventions. I guess if you're fluent in Italian it wouldn't be too bad. I wonder if they got caught. He did. He was immediately expelled, and he can't get a PhD in Denmark anymore, as he was studying there at the time. All the time. 4.9 overall and 3.0 difficulty, right where I want to be. 2 years ago I lost my chili pepper though, which signifies a hot teacher. It legitimately inspired me to start working out again. I'm going to get that MFER back. Edit, wow, apparently they just stopped giving out chili peppers 2 years ago. Have I still been hot this whole time? If you still care about your students, and are still passionate about what you teach, you will always be hot pepper. Wholesome comment of the day. Turns out the real journey is the chili pepper we make along the way. Glad I didn't have to break it to you, lest you blame me for any loss of motivation to stay healthy. I love that you are worrying if you are still hot, haha. It sounds like you are one of those professors that students really enjoy in class, very charismatic. He's not going to bump you up a letter grade. Wait, chili peppers weren't related to your teaching score. A friend of mine looked me up and said, "Oh, you're chili pepper hot." I just assumed that was about teaching. Honestly, the alternative sounds pretty implausible. Chili pepper means you sexy bro. Thanks bro. The conglomerate of students doesn't lie. Professor, the student union has come together to form this statement pertaining to your rating, that ass. Publicly, the site claimed the chili pepper was for a dynamic teaching style. But it was used as if it was meant for physical attractiveness. Source. Keep working towards it until a student draws one on your board. I love the mini existential crisis in your edit, ha. Was I hot all along or not? That sudden realization. Always have been. Username checks out. Eggplant. Still hot and didn't even know it. That's Kiana level humility. I looked at mine. Got comments like students too much really into the subject matter, fashionable for an older lady. Ick what the intent of the first one was, but the last one. I was no more than 30 lol. I remember teaching my first course at 23, as a grad assist, and just seeing baby faces of freshmen everywhere. My first class at 22 was seniors who had failed. They were 19/20ths. It was awkward in retrospect. It's so hilarious how an age seems ancient until you get to it. One of my coworkers is a former college professor. On one of her reviews, someone wrote, "She thinks she's funny. She's not. It's awkward." It's also on RateMyProfessor. She is very awkward also and tries to make jokes sometimes that aren't very funny. But she's also rated very highly, which matches my experience with her. She is extremely good at delivering information. She has a good sense of humor for us, but we're all a little warped here, so that's probably the difference. I feel like making awkward bad jokes you think are funny is a requirement of being a professor. 100% makes a good professor. Two different students, several years apart, left me a 2-word review, the devil. Most of my other reviews are very positive, and my average is high, but the devil, twice, has always made me grin. I mean, I teach at a Christian college, so that must be a serious new achievement in incompetence if they hired the devil to be a professor. I graduated from a Christian university, and another classmate in a certain course started referring to our professors as the devil halfway through the semester. She was awesome but no nonsense, so when I asked why he thought that about her, he said, with complete seriousness, "We're a school founded on the teachings of Christ, and she won't give me grace or understanding or forgiveness when I don't turn my stuff in on time." Every other professor is fine with it, but she always takes points off, so there's almost no point in turning it in late, but she doesn't take any blame in my failing this course. So maybe those two students are just delusional slackers who are mad you're not Christ-like enough to give them an A at their $34,000 a year Christian school. If I taught a Christian college and got that review, I'd have it framed and hung in my office. Of course, there goes my tenure, but damn. What an ego boost. My college had a notoriously hard professor. One year somebody photoshopped his face on Gandalf going "You shall not pass," along with some other memes. He printed them out and hung them in his office. Edit, spelling. Similar vibe at my college. Intro to Java prof bragged that 70% of the class dropped after a month. Someone had the balls to ask the prof how he thought that reflected on him. The prof hand-waved it away with vague notions of the subject being intrinsically hard. Which wasn't the case, the prof is just incompetent. I mean, you would expect the devil to be quite knowledgeable on the subject. My uncle was an associate chemistry professor at a large state university. Curious about his ratings, I searched him up on the site. He had terrible, almost comedic reviews. Things along the lines of his lectures are just him rambling non-stop for 90 minutes. I can barely understand what he says half the time. I learned more from watching Breaking Bad, and it's an easy A, one open book true and false exam. I've never had the balls to ask him if he'd ever read his reviews until he brought it up one time randomly at a Thanksgiving dinner, when he was retiring, and I asked him what he thought about teaching. He said he was apathetic about leaving the school, and the students didn't really respect him. What do you mean? I asked inquisitively. He answered, "There's this site online where you can write reviews on your professors." My heart jumped. He went on, "Oh, it's total BS though. It's like Amazon. Only students who don't like the professor write reviews." It's true, the dude rambles a lot, and is hard to follow even in normal conversations. I can totally understand the reviews. He was full of confirmation bias though, and was only using the site to reaffirm his already held viewpoint. People get into teaching for different reasons. Some really want to share knowledge. They like seeing the light and excitement in a student's eyes when they grasp a difficult concept, and will go out of their way to help people understand. They understand that it takes different approaches of explanation to different people, and will happily spend extra time with those that struggle. Others feel being a teacher is a perfect opportunity to show people how much more they know than them. They like lording that over others like a power. They typically don't care if the students understand or not. As long as they know more than the students, they will believe they are better. These guys don't care about reviews, or bad feedback, doesn't affect their power in any way. Professors are often just forced to give lectures. Some just care about their research, so they invest little time into improving their lectures. I can understand it though. If you are one of the best researchers in your field, and you are forced to give super basic courses, it can be boring. Yeah, teaching has to happen if you work at a university. I had a prof who was brilliant. He had to dumb his PhD thesis down because there weren't enough people qualified to review it. He cared, he was just not cut out for teaching. He was a little off socially, and he clearly didn't know how to structure a course. His lectures didn't flow logically, and his tests had nothing to do with anything in the course. But if you want a research job at a university, you have to teach, so there he was. Again, he really cared and tried. Teaching was just not his thing. I understand schools can't afford to hire a full-time teaching staff, and a full-time research staff with no overlap, but it's unfortunate. My college algebra prof was too smart. He was unable to break things down into beginning level and make us understand. Most of us dropped his class. I took a different prof the next semester who explained it so well I accidentally made an A. I don't think that being too smart and being a good teacher are mutually exclusive. There have been brilliant people who are also great teachers, think Richard Feynman. After all, true genius is supposedly being able to make a complicated concept sound simple. I do think it can be rare, especially because very smart people often have defects in their social skills, which is an essential part of teaching, but I don't think that being very smart automatically means you'll be a bad teacher. Professor here, and I disagree. I research in the areas of artificial intelligence, machine vision, and other branches of signal processing, which is obviously pretty cutting-edge stuff, and at the moment I have about $15 million in grant funding, so I am not a slouch in the research area. I teach some advanced courses in my research area, but I also teach a large first-year course in programming, and that's the course I love teaching the most. This is when you get a chance to really inspire people to love the topic, and set them up for a rewarding education and career. Sure, some will be there just to get the grade and move on, but if you can make a difference to even a handful of those students, then you've done your job, and it's immensely satisfying. Hard work, but so rewarding. Okay, not all the time. If you look at some of the greatest researchers in history, they were / are generally amazingly good teachers as well, whether it was basic or advanced material. Because they brought their passion for the topic to the classroom, and were genuinely interested in advancing knowledge, whether that was at the cutting edge of the current research, or advancing knowledge in those just starting out in the field. Some academics seem to hate teaching with a passion, but from my experience they are in the minority, and generally aren't the best researchers either. You sound like a great professor. But I had a professor that handed out the end-of-year evals, and said something along the lines of write whatever you want. I won't read them, I have tenure. That lined up with how he approached the class pretty well. So both sides of the spectrum exist. Thanks for your insightful comment. I agree with you that a lot of the great researchers are good teachers / lecturers. However, from my limited personal experience and interactions with my professors/supervisors, there are definitely some great researchers which just do not care at all about their lectures. Thankfully, they are in the minority based on my observations. This. I am a department chair. I see all my faculty's ratings, not just the RMP ones. In a department of about 20, my top 2 teachers are some of my most active researchers. More telling though, my 2 worst teachers, we're talking a couple of standard deviations below the mean, are my 2 worst researchers. They just suck all around, and are lazy and incompetent at all aspects of their job. Of course, there are occasional exceptions that confirm the stereotype of head in the clouds researchers who can't teach, but these are exceptions, not the rule. And there are exceptions the other way, slack as shit, everyone gets an A, and class is a whole lot of fun profs who get great ratings. But overall, there's a higher order competence factor that affects both teaching and research. I once received an envelope with 11 letters from music performance majors, piano and organ. Essentially, the students highlighted teaching techniques that they believed brought out the best in their musical abilities, and propelled them to continue on in their chosen career as performers. They even included pics of themselves for me to remember them by. Learning and playing music is so powerful, and so influential. I don't know if it's something about people who choose to teach music, or the vulnerable kids who don't find interest in sports or other events who learn and love and cling to music. I had a music teacher in high school, who I watched inspire and motivate kid after kid. He respected us and taught us genuinely. I took a year of music theory, and I'll never forget the first day. He sat on his table in front of the class, and said, "By the end of this course, you will know 85% of what I know about music composition." There wasn't even a textbook. Just him teaching and us practicing. The final project was to write a page of melody, harmonize it, then transpose for 4 different instruments of our choosing. Then he brought in band members to play our music. Tears up, that guy was incredible. I can count at least 7 or 8 friends who are now music performers or teachers or somehow involved in music, and I am 100% sure they wouldn't be in their profession if it wasn't for that one specific teacher. He inspired us to get immersed in music. I hated playing the saxophone, but I joined concert and marching band just so I could be in his classes. The school didn't recognize bell choir as an extracurricular activity, so we had to fundraise ourselves and practice early in the morning before classes began. He had a very sad retirement. The school district cut most/all of the music funding, and he begrudgingly left. I don't know what all went down, but even though he stayed in my small town, he didn't stay close with former students after retirement. If only the district knew the immeasurable lessons and values he taught his students. I don't know much about music, but this sounds really sweet. When I drive to attend this class, I do not wear my seatbelt because I hope to crash and die rather than attend another class by XX prof. Found the same review on a company that I was going to have a second interview with on Glassdoor. That was the funniest for sure, but based on the rest of the reviews, I bowed out of the interview process. There is a particular company, I wish I did some Glassdoor searching first. It was generally all information I had at my fingertips, but was ignoring because of the high uncapped commission potential. It turned out you had to be a fucking shark to sell anything in that company. Products were insanely overpriced, and if you didn't walk away with signed paperwork and a check, you lost the sale, because if a customer spent 5 seconds researching your company, they stopped taking your calls. Sounds pretty miserable. The company I had mentioned was trying to masquerade the position as entry-level marketing. As someone trying to start a career in marketing, I thought sweet. Turns out, the marketing was milling around best by selling TVs to people or selling insurance door to door. Marketing all right. And pay was 100% commission-based when they advertised $55K/year. Bit of a mix. Some said some really lovely things, but the one I am still salty about said that I talk too fast, and that they couldn't get the notes down. Tell me these things while I am teaching. I want my students to learn. But I can't know if you're lost if you don't tell me. It's something I now carefully reiterate at the start of each semester. Just an idea. I wonder about implementing anonymous, short surveys, 2 to 3 QS, throughout the course asking for feedback on lectures. Something like, was today's lecture pace too slow, too fast, just right? In my experience with trainings, I'm not a professor, but maybe one day, this strategy has given us a good response rate when asking for feedback. Please rate today's lecture on a scale of bear porridge: A, too slow; B, too fast; C, just right. D, would break into your house, get into your bed, and wait for you to come home. Was the test taken by Mary Kay Latourneau? A problem with this is there's a tendency for students to select too fast no matter what, since they fear the professor will make the class harder otherwise. For what it's worth, I've done this, but it was not very useful. I think the biggest problem is that they won't give negative feedback while I still control grades. Surveys are anonymous, but maybe they think I will identify them somehow and fail them for giving me negative feedback. However, I did get a ton of karma on r/murdered by words when I posted some of my student feedback. So that's a plus. We do exactly this, but to ensure anonymity, we get a student to run that session and take all the feedback in person. So I ask for a volunteer to run it, give them a list of example things to ask about. Students are free to add anything they want though, and let them go nuts for half an hour while I head to the campus pub for a quick pint. We do it about 1/3 of the way through the course, so they've seen enough to know what they like/don't like, but there's also time to change things if we need to. Generally the feedback is positive, but some things have really surprised me, particularly recently in the online teaching environment. Some of the things you think students will love they find a bit meh, other things I thought they'd hate, making them do more work because they weren't prepared for lab classes, they actually really appreciated and liked. Weird species, humans. I had a prof who did this, and he was literally the best professor I'd ever had. Took every class of his I could. Learned so much from him. Hope he got tenure. You don't even have to change things. Giving students a voice allows better buy-in to what you are doing. Most of all, if you do change things up, do it based on trends, not a single feedback. Some professors get an attitude with you if you tell them that, and then the student ends up feeling embarrassed in front of the entire class. So that could be a reason why no one said anything. There are also just a lot of students who don't have the confidence to speak up, especially if they think they are the only one with that problem. It doesn't matter how many times people are told they are rarely the only one, and even if they are, that's okay. People still don't want to single themselves out as the one who couldn't keep up, even in private. I write slow, so I used an audio recorder in school. I took basic plot point notes and then listened to the recording and filled in more details in the notes when studying. I really don't know why I never saw another student record anything. Some professors are really squicky about recording. At least in my school and program, some won't care if you do an audio recording, and others will kick you out of lecture if they find a recording device on the desk unless you've specifically asked them and given one of a couple reasons that are acceptable to them to record the lecture. At the end of the day, anything said in lecture can be considered the professor's intellectual property, and some really work to protect that IP. Haha, you're similar to one of my past professors. They taught really fast and I often ended up missing several notes. Some students did mention this, but it was their natural speed, and they were bound to move back to that speed when they tried to change it. Sometimes I would ask for notes after class, other times I just suffered in silence. My favorite lecturer would write the topics for the day on the board before class, in the order she'd cover them, then wrote some relevant terms as they were discussed. I couldn't always keep up because she talked quietly, but this really helped me jump back in quick instead of giving up when I got lost. I wish other professors would do this if they insist on a lecture-only class. The hard part is keeping in the right order, but I think just turning to look every few minutes or preparing the lecture notes beforehand would solve that. I had a lecturer who gave us the semester's list of topics with the date they would be discussed, and the key terms listed under each one roughly in order of the lecture. It was so helpful to keep track of what's important to know and to not get lost. It was a great reference tool. A Spanish professor I had once remarked to my class that if we looked him up, he had the little chili icon, which means he was rated hot. Then he started jokingly blowing kisses and thanking everyone. My philosophy teacher felt the same about chili peppers. The last day of class he told us to leave as many as we could on his RateMyProfessor profile. Unfortunately they took away the hot chilies. I had no idea they took away the chilies. Well, I suppose I can understand why, they were hardly relevant to teaching. I am so glad they took those away. I had a bio prof who was so proud of his, joking about how he's a hot commodity in a town this small. I don't think I was the only one in the seats thinking, dude. We know your wife. Wholesome. Picante. Stick with her, she comes off as ditzy, but she has depth. Whoever rated me, nailed it. I am learning disabled and I garble my words, but I know my shit. My work/my humor, web address. That makes me feel feelings. I too experience emotions, fellow human. /deploy laugh. Pi ha 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 ha. I had a math professor last semester that during the first lecture of every class pulls up his RMP, which was a 1, 4, and in his university internal student surveys, and read some of the more insulting ones. He would then talk about how he doesn't believe in great teachers, only good ones, and that he can, and will answer any question, or restate anything you ask him to, but at the end of the day the onus of learning is on you on your own time. Turns out he's an incredible lecturer, who gives you access to every test or quiz question he's ever had. Only has a bad rating because he teaches hard math classes that tend to be the first math class that a lot of engineering students struggle in, so they blame him for their lack of effort. Edit, the class was Diff EQ and linear algebra for those of you who are trying to guess it. I had a math professor like this. She was the most hated teacher in the school. Actually a really good teacher, she just worked had students super freaking hard and failed people who wouldn't. It was a good weed out course. She guaranteed if you could pass her class, you could pass engineering. Kick-ass teacher, but she was hated for it. Not her fault. Success in engineering/STEM-oriented mathematics require hard work. My high school history teacher was like this. Everyone said she was a raging bitch, and that she never gave out as to students. Was terrified when I took her year 12 history class, but determined. Turns out she's a phenomenal teacher, and as were easy to come by. She just actually graded kids on merit rather than handing out grades to meet a quota. This was my experience as an high school teacher. Worked at a private school where we were evaluated heavily on student survey results. The teachers who graded easily shockingly did the best. It's possible that they were better, but I don't think so, just less rigorous. Embarrassed to say, but I made my grading easier over my few years there. Results went up and all of a sudden I am a better teacher according to my principal. I didn't change shit, I just started grading easier. The teachers who graded easily shockingly did the best. It's possible that they were better, but I don't think so, just less rigorous. You're not wrong. I tutored math as an engineering undergraduate. The students who come from private schools/AP classes actually end up flunking out the fastest, not what you'd think. Their justification, and their parents. And the lawyer their parents hired, is always some version of, I got straight A's in high school in AP calculus blah blah blah, this teacher is bullsh*t at teaching and isn't being fair to me, and is grading me too hard. A lot of them could have pulled okay/good grades had they been willing to change up their study habits. But it is easier to just say the teacher sucked. Wish my Cala professor was like that. Mine was my first class in university, and expected all students to have a decent background in derivatives and integrals before stepping foot in her classroom. Little pre-calc me passed with AC, but my buddy who took calca in high school got a high A. She was a shit teacher even by his standards, and he did not learn much from her. I had a professor that was incredibly smart, working on his 4th PhD, and everyone loved him. One day thought he was talking about a problem, and turned to write on the whiteboard, and I guess forgot exactly where he was because he was one of those walk and talk types, turned around and walked straight into a wall. Someone put it on that site, along with saying he was the best professor ever. A week later he came in cracking up and said, "Which of you little assholes put that online?" It was great. It was a class of 8, and we all knew who it was and laughed at him. On the other hand, I taught a couple classes, or taught, but somehow I made it to the website. My rating is terrible. I don't have a whole lot of ratings, but I thought it was funny. A couple said stuff like he's really smart, but I am pretty sure he was high every class. They were some very perceptive students. Why would you do for PhDs? Was he Bruce Banner? Source: I am a PhD student. One is more than enough. Some people just live life through education. Get a ton of degrees/PhDs, and teach at a college, I guess. Not on RateMyProfessor, but the first semester I taught at the university level, one of the comments on my evaluations was "would look good in leather." The department secretaries had to type them up before giving us the originals to read, and they got quite the laugh out of that. Someone else said, "decent to look at but talks too much." I mean, I was teaching the class. Decent to look at but talks too much. Damn it, it's hard to fantasize properly when you keep interrupting my daydreams to do your job. My mom got a 1-star review saying she talks too much. The difference is she's not a teacher, she's a social worker. So, in that case, I kinda get it, lol. I had ratings as a lab ta then when I was teaching for like a year at a community college, and most of the ratings were supportive. He's a new teacher and it shows, but you can tell he really cares about the subject. A small portion were negative, like how you expect from slackers. He grades too harsh, nothing made sense, etc. Most generally picked up on how introverted I am as a person. Wait. TAS are on there as well. Looks himself up D. Oh, I am not on there. I also stopped being a ta quite a few years ago. I looked up my boyfriend's dad once. His students were not kind. I thought it was funny. I do like him, he is very nice to me. I just could understand the students saying he was a hard teacher. You guys know some professors write their own ratings, right? It's a tough class, but if you show up and do the work and give themselves chili peppers, hey, nothing wrong with a bit of self-love. Probably not in class, mind you. Yeah, but you can easily spot those ones. I mean, I've written reviews with exactly that tone, and I am not a professor. I just didn't think that the professors who I was reviewing deserved the abhorrent reputation they had on campus because students weren't willing to put in the effort to pass a class that is intended to be difficult regardless of the professor teaching it. College students can be so lazy and then blame their professors. Most classes are not that hard if you put in some effort. I once dated a guy who was a professor and had never looked himself up, so I did so on our first date. Turns out he was very well liked. There was a second date. Something tells me he knew. I used to get nice and sometimes creepy comments on my appearance. 10 years later those types of comments have dried up, but my colleagues and administrators never miss a chance to tease me about them. Overall a 4.5 or something, but not too bad. I pay much more attention to my official university student evals. Not a professor, but I just looked up my mom, mostly teaches child development, and she had the following 2 reviews. At first when I saw her, all I could think about was how she looked like the penguin guy from Batman. I looked up a picture and it is actually a pretty close resemblance, lol. Her fashion is more interesting than the class. No idea where she gets her fashion advice. I would be embarrassed to go out in public with her if I was one of her children, whom she always talks about. Your mom sounds awesome, but are you embarrassed to go out in public with her? He's really nice and really funny, but bad at his job. Latin Isn't Dead with Professor Opstad was probably my favorite. It's alive and well and used for torture. Oh man, I just realized they took away the hot pepper S. My dad is a math professor and he rates himself and gives himself chili peppers. So take the ratings with a grain of salt. Not a prof, but I had one who took pride in his shitty ratings. He pulled up his RMP page first day of class and joyously pointed out all the negative reviews to try and make a point about how tough and unforgiving he was. Dude got off on failing students, S2G. I remember I took one class and on the first day the professor rubbed me the wrong way, spent the whole class talking about her achievements, and how we will be strictly reading her published papers or papers from people in the field she emphasized she was good friends with. I like when professors kind of jump into it on the first day, but we did nothing that day and I felt kind of antsy the whole time, but I was like, okay, it's fine, I need this class for my minor. At the end of she made a comment about hope you enjoy and don't believe what you read on RateMyProfessor wink wink. I had never planned to look her up before, but after that. Wow. If this class was to be like the others she taught, she would spend it talking about her own work and how she was superior. Nope, right out of there and transferred into another class with a div professor who turned out to be a really awesome lady. Wouldn't have happened if she just kept her mouth shut about her online rating. For context, this was an art history class. They say it's better to be feared than to be loved. Not a prof, and neither was the teacher, lol. Year 8, 12-13-year-olds, someone wrote on my teacher's page that she was a Dementor. Like from Harry Potter. She tore the entire class a new one, and yet no one would confess to it. Favorite memory from that class. My 9th grade English teacher overheard students refer to her by some pretty mean nickname, along the lines of MRS, Evil Flower, which was a really lame pun on her name. She sat down the class and asked us to explain what exactly is so evil in what she does, pointing out everything she asks of us is pretty reasonable, and called students out for being entitled brats. Which was 100% true. She was admittedly a stern teacher, who sometimes came off as abrasive, but she was overall a really good teacher. From what I gathered, she also had a pretty rough life. I felt really bad for her. I am not a professor, but my grandmother is an online professor, and while my sister and I were looking through the website while picking classes, we thought it would be fun to look at her reviews. She had only a few, and they were majority positive. A lot of them talked about how kind and accommodating she was, which was surprising to me and my sister because with family our grandmother is generally strict and very much a my way or the highway type of person. Not to say she's awful, we do like our grandma LMAO, but it was surprising that the word accommodating was matched up with her. There were complaints about how much she made them read though, lol. I have one bad review that I am about 99% positive was written by an angry racist I had that semester who was furious with me when I shut down a racist tirade he was on. If it wasn't him who wrote that review, then I don't know what I did to piss that student off. If you're curious, he tried to claim that African and Muslim immigrants are destroying Europe, and when I wouldn't accept his view he pulled out what he clearly thought was an automatic argument winner, which is that he had a friend from Switzerland who told him it was true, and apparently I wasn't allowed to argue with that because he was from Europe. I argued with it anyway, and a bad Rate My Prof review was born. I am a graduate TA, and had some students like that too. I find it's often easier just to say you're on a tight schedule, and to invite them to talk to you in office hours, if they really care about substantiating their opinion. Actually, sometimes that ends up being productive. I had a student who kept insisting that Orientalism as a framework is pointless, which seemed like he was being disruptive, but we actually had an interesting discussion about why academics sought to differentiate different kinds of racial prejudices with different terminology. Validation. Throw me a bone. If you haven't noticed, most people commenting keep starting off with "I'm not a professor." At least tell us which class you teach. Face with tears of joy. that you're doing good. Wow! You are still with us. Thanks for being such a nice person. As long as you are here, why not like this video and subscribe to our channel? Also, you can press the bell icon, so you won't miss any future uploads.